The young couple came to life at the same time when they both proclaimed, "500,000. Chet, the male, went on to add, "We picked up that little gem of knowledge last week at an empowerment gathering. Of course many of those turn out to be simple runaway teens and other such circumstances where the missing party is found without any harm, but there is also an alarming number that are never found, either dead or alive. Now what do you think happens to all those missing bodies?" "Very astute, sir," Growler said, impressed the young city dude was able to figure out the secret so quickly. "They're being eaten?" Corey asked, though he already had figured out the inference. "That's a lot of people. They are of all financial, racial, and gender groups. You hear a lot more about the rich ones when they go missing, but whatever is taking them doesn't give a shit whether they have money or not. The rich go missing at the same rate as the poor and they all have the same rate of being found," Growler noted. "So you two think that the sky creatures are responsible for the missing people?" Just the ones that are never found, of course." Corey stifled a laugh. It didn't escape Growler. "Laugh if you want, but those people went somewhere. Their bodies never found. Thousands of them every year. Rich, poor, old, young, whatever is taking them doesn't discriminate. And has never stopped and never will." Suddenly they heard the sound of an 18-wheeler's horn cut through the blizzard-driven wind the way an announcement overrides the music at a dance studio. Completely coincidentally, but nevertheless could not have happened at a more dramatic moment, the power finally cut out, leaving the inhabitants of the bathroom building in complete darkness for about 5 seconds while the backup lights kicked on. While that happened, the family of 4 woke up, led by their youngest, who woke up crying and screaming for his parents. While they waited for the backup lights to kick in, there was plenty of time to peer into the dark white and try and figure out what was going on with the truckers. Obviously one of them was not going anywhere, but the other one must have made it back to his truck and most likely was blaring the horn in an attempt to coax the other trucker toward his location. Perhaps it would not be needed, but Corey took advantage of the truck horn giving away its location, and he used 2 points that he could see to confirm the direction of where the trucks were parked. Growler took notice and did the same. Chet and his girlfriend Veronica were up against the window trying to see what was going on. There was a sudden, explosively loud bang, and the glass where the young couple had been standing was broken but did not shatter. The young couple quickly moved away from that spot, and after everyone settled down it was discovered that a rock the size of a small basketball had been thrown. If the glass had not been there, it was likely both the 2 young people would have been killed or extremely hurt. The bang woke up the family of 4. The boys were just groggy, not upset, until they had been awake for perhaps 2 minutes when they saw something that set them both to crying and clearly terrified them. When asked, they claimed a giant monkey had appeared just outside the window glass. Before anything further could be determined, the glass was tested again when another large rock crashed against it. Then came another and then 2 more. The glass was beginning to give. "We've got to make some decisions, and very soon," Corey said. He kicked out the window of the candy machine and told the boys to get anything edible out of it and take it into one of the bathrooms. He glanced into the women's bathroom to see if there was anything in there that might be helpful to their cause. The only difference he could spot was the tampon dispenser, which didn't seem to be important. "Either room will do. Just pick one and then get all the trash cans moved into it. Growler, we are going to need to move the firewood in my truck into the bathroom. You and Chad and myself go get the firewood and chainsaw. Sound good?" "Yes," Growler replied, his voice still calm and confident. As the 3 men went out and then down the stairs to the lower deck, they discussed what to grab out of Corey's truck. "We'll also need something to keep the bathroom door shut. It opens in, so we'll need something to keep the door from being pushed inwards in order to prevent the door from being opened. I think we can accomplish that using one of these planks from the deck. As soon as I get the chainsaw, I will get it running and cut a plank. There is a small can of chainsaw mix that we will need." "What's that?" Chet asked. "It's a mixture of gas and oil made for the chainsaw," Corey replied. They reached the bottom of the stairs and were momentarily stopped in their tracks because of the size of the tracks they saw in the snow ahead of them. At least twice the size of the tracks they were leaving. "Pay no attention to the tracks. It accomplishes nothing," Growler said over the sound of the howling wind. The snowfall had let up a bit, but the snow blowing was as bad as ever. The three men pushed on and soon were at Corey's truck gathering the things they had discussed. "Get as much firewood as you can carry," Corey announced. Then he grabbed the chainsaw and the fuel and quickly started the saw up and cut loose a plank to block the door of the bathroom. He gathered it up and led the way while followed by the other two men carrying the firewood. When they reached the top of the stairs and then were just outside the bathroom building doorway, Corey set his stuff down and opened the door for the other two men, and that was when they noticed Chet was no longer with them. "I thought he was right behind me," Growler said. He had just set down the armload of firewood he had carried, putting it inside the men's bathroom. "We have to go back and look for him." "Agreed," Corey replied. "While we are down there we need to grab more firewood since Chet didn't make it with his armload. So let's go down, and if he isn't there we go over and get another armload and then come back up." "Agreed?" "Yes," Growler replied. Jeff Samuels, the father of the family of four, stepped up. "I'll go with you this time." "Good. We can use the extra firewood. No matter what you see when we get down there, put it to the back of your mind and concentrate on the finish line. We need as much firewood as you can carry," Corey said. "Unless the other man is down there and needs help getting back up here. In that case that will be your job. Go ahead and get the man back up here ASAP. We will carry the firewood and be not far behind you," Growler added. The three men shook hands and departed the bathroom building. Going down the stairs, Corey noticed that for the first time since the storm had begun he could see through the falling snow well enough to see the 18-wheelers. One had turned on not only its running lights but also the headlights. He thought he could see what looked like several men, big men, surrounding the cab of the big rig. Perhaps that was why the horn was being blown? The trucker was trying to scare away those big men, who weren't men at all. They were the sky creatures and they were hungry. Then it became clear enough they could see that the semi was moving in a back and forth motion, perhaps another effort to scare away the hairy beast that surrounded it. They would back away 10 or 12 feet whenever the truck would surge forward or go backwards. Corey figured that there might have been two reasons for such a plan beyond that of trying to scare away the beasts. It might have been because the truck wasn't able to get enough traction to just drive forward. It might have been because the trucker wasn't yet ready to leave his friend or brother behind. Once one of the big rigs went forward they would be put back out onto the highway, making it very troublesome if not impossible for the truck to ever get back to the rest stop. Corey had a moment where he wondered if they should be going out to help the truck driver, but out there was advantage sky creature. At least staying close to the building and decks had so far kept the creatures at bay. Though he thought that might be ending soon since the disappearance of Chet and the breaking of the glass back at the bathrooms. He decided that the truck drivers didn't want to be bothered, so be it. Finally they were at the bottom of the stairs. He didn't want to look but had no choice, and sure enough there were more tracks across the deck. How many were there? He thought he saw at least 3 around the semi, and most likely there were more out of view. Were there some waiting for them? Corey was behind Growler and the family man was behind him. They quickly made their way across the deck and began loading up firewood to take back. Each man got an armload and Corey grabbed a roll of duct tape out of the cab. Then they turned to go back to the stairs only to see one of the hairy beasts standing there between them and the stairs. Growler looked at Corey and then at the family man. Before he could say anything a light came shining into view, causing all of them to look back behind them. When the light had moved enough to stop blinding them they realized it was the 18-wheeler and it was coming over the median and headed toward their location. The big rig's horn began to blow and all 3 men turned back to look at the hairy beast and it was gone. No words were necessary as all 3 men raced toward the stairs carrying some of the firewood they hadn't dropped. They didn't stop at the base of the stairs. Instead all 3 climbed the stairs as fast as possible because looking out at the road they could see the semi was up over the curb and headed toward Corey's pickup and the lower deck. It crashed into both, coming to rest just outside the stairwell. By the time the semi came to a full stop near the stairwell the 3 men carrying the firewood had made it back to the bathroom building. They each stumbled into the waiting room letting their loads of firewood fall to the floor as they followed suit. Outside they could see the sky creatures coming closer but they were down below and still had to make their way up to where the bathroom building was located. Everybody into the men's room. Grab the firewood and bring it with you, Growler ordered, his usual calm voice sounding much more urgent now. How are we going to barricade that door shut? The family man asked. It opens in. Corey stepped up with an armload of firewood he had gathered. I've got a plan. Just get the firewood inside the bathroom and let's see how good this duct tape works. If it hasn't been ruined by the cold, then I have an idea that might work. Once inside the bathroom, the idea was explained. They could use the firewood to block the opening of the bathroom door by placing it end to end the length of the bathroom floor until reaching the door. Corey had his chainsaw, so he would cut the last piece of firewood into the proper length. They would use the duct tape to wrap around the whole thing in an effort to help keep it in one piece. Then they would do it again with the next pieces of firewood until they had 2 long poles the length of the bathroom floor. Next they took the plank that Corey had cut out of the lower deck and cut the ends at angles so that it could be used to prop up against the door by taking the chainsaw and cutting a notch into the door so that the plank would have a place to catch, and then took the hammer/hatchet and used it to drive nails into the door and the plank to hold it in place. I don't think lining up the firewood as a way to block the door will be necessary. Instead, we can use it to stay warm. That one window is big enough to accommodate the girth of the trash cans. Let's use the axe and cut open the bottom of the trash cans and then use the duct tape to tape them together into a length long enough to reach up to that window. Probably will take about 3 or 4 of them. Then we use another trash can as the stove. Leave the bottom in it, but see if you can't cut open the side of the trash can so we can have a way to put more wood into it. So we'll have the stove can on the bottom, and then the trash cans we have duct taped together will be the flume. Just break out the window and stick one end of the trash can flume through the window. Good thinking, Growler, Corey said. We can use the hammer/hatchet to cut a groove into the concrete floor, which will help keep the plank from sliding when they try to push their way in. Jeff Samuels, the family man, comforted his wife and boys. When he had the 3 in somewhat of a calm state, he slipped over to where Corey and Growler were working on cutting a groove into the concrete floor. He spoke in an excited but whispered tone. What about the truck driver? The rig crashed into your truck. He pointed at Corey. He's probably in need of help. Growler stopped what he was doing and stood up, looking Jeff Samuels in the eye, and said in his calm, confident voice, "We were incredibly lucky to get back from our last trip out of the building. You have more to lose than anybody else. Is it worth it to you to go save some jerk that went out of his way to tell you that if you needed help not to bother him?" Jeff Samuels took a step backwards. I am not so convinced the man, or men, meant things in that sort of context. I think they were thinking it was going to be a long weekend where they could catch up on some sleep. But that said, his voice lowered even further. No, I'm not willing to risk my family to save the one man. I just thought I should say something in case you guys forgot about him. Corey chimed in. We haven't forgot about anybody, but did you see how many of those creatures were around the semi before it came crashing this way? Growler is right. When I looked out from the stairs and saw how many hairy beasts were around the big rig, I thought to myself that we probably weren't going to make it back from my pickup. Maybe we wouldn't have if not for the truck coming at us. You both saw the creature blocking our way. If those headlights hadn't scared it into moving. I shudder to think what was going to happen next. There's only one thing I'm willing to do for the guy. We can use the chainsaw and cut a small window into the bathroom door so we can see what is on the other side. If the guy shows up, we will let him in. That's as far as I will risk. Growler said. Jeff Samuels shook his head in agreement. I guess I will go back and stay with the wife and kids. If you two need me for anything, speak up. In one of the stalls, the young woman who had lost her mate, Chet, sobbed. Jeff Samuels rejoined his family while Growler and Corey used a small amount of the chainsaw mix to start the fire in the trash can. Outside the men's door, they began to hear a bombardment of rocks hitting the glass. The sound was incredibly intimidating. Every minute or two, the shower of rocks would compromise the glass, causing it to break and slide across the waiting room floor. Then, with one of the sounds of glass breaking, came a beating upon the door and a man screaming to let him in. Corey and Growler jumped up from hovering over the fire and sprinted to the door. After a quick look through the window they had cut using the chainsaw, they removed the plank and allowed the door to swing open. As quickly as it opened, they shut it and replaced the plank which blocked the door from coming open. The man stumbled into the room bleeding and looking like he had went 2 rounds with a wood chipper. Despite his beaten and bloody appearance, the man seemed to be in one piece. Grundgefsen was a middle-aged fat man with a face that told a tale of a lifelong beatdown that he had proven tough enough to take. His face bore the scars of teenage acne, the glasses he wore said he couldn't see anything more than 2 feet in front of him, and he had an attitude necessary to have survived such a life. "You okay?" Corey asked, offering to help the man up. "I'd be fine if I had a machine gun and 10 minutes of clear weather to hunt those damn things down and kill every one of them." He took Corey's hand and stood up to look everyone in the eye. "Thanks for letting me in. I'm Grun. You haven't seen my brother, have you?" The faces of Growler and Corey were enough for Grun to make his own conclusions. "I'm sorry," Growler said. "I didn't think he made it. They at the least broke his neck right off. Maybe they tore his head clear off his body," Grun replied. Corey was glad they weren't out in the waiting room. He probably would have given away the fact that the man's brother, or at least his head, was right outside the door. "Are you cold? We have a fire." It was all he could think to say. He wondered if it was his place to tell the man that he had found the head, and then decided if the man had figured out that his brother didn't make it, then enough was known. Then there began a pounding on the door. Growler stepped over to the bathroom door and looked out the little window they had cut into the door to see what or who was on the other side. All he could see was brown fur. "They're right outside the door. How long you think that door will hold up to that beating?" Corey grabbed the chainsaw mixture and said, "We won't have to find out. Move out of the way." Growler stepped back and let Corey step up to the little window. Corey took the chainsaw mixture and splashed it out through the window, saving the last half-gallon of it. Next he tore off a piece of his t-shirt and dipped it into the mixture. Then he pulled out his lighter and lit the piece of clothing on fire and tossed it out the little window. The beating quit immediately and they could hear the howls of pain coming from the beasts that had been burned. The family of 4 and the young woman had gathered together and were huddled in the stall furthest from the bathroom entrance. The 3 men, Grun, Growler and Corey, were in the main part of the bathroom, standing just a few steps from the makeshift wood stove. Suddenly the duct tape which was holding the trash cans together as a flume melted through, allowing it all to come tumbling down. The bathroom filled with smoke and it was chaos while the men got the trash cans back together into a long tube and then retaped them together using half of what was left of the duct tape. It was noted they had enough tape for one more taping when this one burned through, and then they would have to go without heat or deal with the smoke. Based on how long it took the first time, I would say we have a couple of hours, maybe longer because we taped it better this time, I think. Growler said, his voice ever the calm, confident tone. Rocks began to beat against the bathroom door. Apparently the sky creatures had figured out if they threw the big rocks at the door from a distance that they wouldn't risk being set on fire. The noise was incredibly intimidating and it was anybody's guess as to how long the door could take the punishment. "They don't give much time for catching your breath, do they?" Grun said. "Anybody got any ideas what to do if they breach the door?" Corey asked. "Best idea I have so far is what you did with the gas mixture. We can throw it on the first ones through and set their asses on fire. After that it's the chainsaw. We might get 1 or 2 with it. Beyond that there is little can be done. Somebody can use the hatchet as a weapon. Those that are not better equipped will use a piece of firewood, but we will all fight. Even the women, because there is nowhere to go if we lose here," Growler said. Grun reached inside his coat and produced a .357 Magnum handgun so everyone could see it. "We got one more thing to add to the weapons list. I've got a full load and another 4 bullets in my pocket. But before you folks think you're saved, let me tell you that I hit 2 of those things dead on in the chest and it barely hesitated them. They might die later, but in the moment." He shook his head. "They won't save anybody. In that case, let's put them to use in the best manner possible. See if you can't hit one of them through the little window. If it backs them up further, then the door may last longer. Every once in a while, when it seems proper, take a shot at them." "Great idea. I'd like nothing better than to try and kill one of the beasts." Grun stepped up to the door and first was frightened backwards as the door was hit by a large rock, but then he stepped up quickly, took aim through the little window and squeezed off a shot. The loud banging that had been constant on the bathroom door finally stopped. Thank goodness. I can halfway think again. I thought that I was going to go crazy from the noise. Corey exclaimed. Anybody know what time it is? Growler asked. Curious how far we are from sunup? 6 hours. The young woman that had lost her mate said. It was a promising sign that maybe she was going to be okay. A loud bang echoed through the bathroom as Groon took a shot through the window. Got him, he laughed. Take that, you hairy cannibal. Show your face again and I'll be glad to trim the other ear as well. Maybe I'll miss and get you right between the eyes. A large rock slammed against the doorway in response. Then it began being hit over and over again. Groon waited a few seconds, then took aim through the little window again and fired another shot. He let go another round of laughter which announced to the rest that he had hit his target. You'll remember me tomorrow, won't you? Damn ape. Growler, will they leave off when the sun comes up? Corey asked over the sound of the rocks banging against the bathroom door. My people say they come down from the top of the mountain with the storm and they leave when it leaves. The question you should perhaps be asking is, when will the first snow plow come rolling along? We could be trapped in here for days. Corey lowered his voice. We won't last days. If we get through tonight and they are not roaming all over tomorrow morning, I suggest we make for the semi still running over in their parking lot. True, we can't all get inside, but some could get in front and the rest would have to get in back. Then we try to drive out of here. Worst case scenario is we get stuck somewhere along the way and have to make our last stand from the truck instead of this bathroom. We may get far enough away that they will give up any pursuit. On top of all that, we've got the truck driver, so if anybody can drive that big rig out of here, it should be him. Yeah, I'd rather. Growler was cut off by the sound of something being thrown into the wood stove flume and then it bounding down the makeshift pipe and into the fire. Immediately the stench of human hair burning began to fill the room. Growler looked into the trash can that had been split open to act as the wood-burning stove. He had intended to be as quick as possible and get whatever it was that was stinking up the room out of there. Instead, the sight caused him to jump backwards and he nearly fell to the ground. When he had regained control of his balance, he forced himself to step forward and he quickly whispered something into Corey's ear. A second later, Corey stepped away from the wood stove and grabbed the young woman that had lost her mate and ushered her back towards the last stall. You don't need to see this. He whispered into her ear and held her while Growler reached into the fire and pulled out Chet's head. The boys let out a cry and Jeff's wife, Tiffany, nearly fainted, being caught by Jeff at the last second. In Growler's hand was the steaming, slightly burned head of Chet. It hadn't been cut off his body but rather had been twisted off, leaving his neck to have been twisted down to a single strand of flesh, making the entire appearance look like some Twilight Zone version of a balloon, which was a human head, and the string holding the balloon was the twisted neck as it fizzled down to just that one bit of flesh. Growler looked around anxiously for some place to put the man's head that his fiancée wouldn't see it. He didn't dare risk opening the bathroom door to throw it out, plus if the apes got a hold of it again they might do the same thing again. He ended up taking one of the sleeping bags from the family of 4 and wrapping it up inside the bag, then he placed it next to one of the toilets. When Corey saw the coast was clear, he allowed the young woman to come back out and join the rest of the group. No further explanation was offered and thankfully she didn't push the issue. Growler moved over to talk with Groon. Can you drive the other diesel out of here if we get to it? Groon was standing next to the fire warming his hands. Getting to it might prove to be the biggest problem with that idea. They are everywhere out there. I would put our chances at 1 in 50. Corey was close enough to overhear. He stepped closer and added his thoughts. Come morning we might not have so many, maybe none of them out there. I don't think we will make another night here. It's tomorrow or I'm afraid maybe never. Growler said, I agree, right now we wouldn't make it. Tomorrow it may not be so hard to see. If they are still here, well, you've got a couple shots left in the gun. We've still got the chainsaw. If the bathroom door holds up till morning, I think we should consider trying it. Hell, I'll go if you are going with me. I think we might be best off leaving the family here. Pick them up on the way out. Groon replied, his weathered face showing a concern that looked out of place on such a face that had obviously seen its own share of hard times and that also showed a confidence for surviving that Corey found comforting in this circumstance but would have found intimidating in others. As the men discussed going out in the morning, the banging against the bathroom door continued. It crossed Corey's mind that the pile of rocks outside the bathroom door must be such that they will have to climb past it when going for the diesel. The family of 4 huddled, joined by the young woman. Just before sunup, the banging against the bathroom door stopped. Everyone braced for what was coming next, but after 10 minutes of quiet, each person inside the men's room began a little ray of hope inside them that the creatures had left. Growler removed the wood plank that was keeping the bathroom door from swinging open. He had spent a good 5 minutes looking every which way through the little window they had cut out, and now he was swinging open the door so to provide a wider view. Looking out where the waiting room glass would have been if it was still intact, Growler was met with grim news. It appeared the reason the banging against the bathroom door had quit was due to the weather. The wind was still blowing hard and the snow was still coming down. Growler couldn't see the semi, so there was no promise it was still running. Snow on the ground had completely covered the severed head of the other truck driver. Drifted inside the waiting room was about 2 feet of snow on one end of the waiting room. Beyond the waiting room there was enough light to make anyone aware the sun had come up, but that was about it. After some discussion, the conclusion was that despite what Growler's ancestors had claimed about the sky creatures riding the winds of the blizzard, that maybe they weren't quite as mystical as was claimed, and if not, then the best chance they had of making it to the 18-wheeler would be when the creatures didn't know where they were. The second choice would be to wait and try when there wasn't any cover from the snow and wind. It stayed the second choice. That left only the question of who was going to go. Grun had a guaranteed ticket since they needed him to drive the semi. It was decided that the best chance for making it to the semi would be to go as a 2-man team. They would be tied together so not to get lost from each other, and one would walk backwards holding the chainsaw, which should keep them from attacking from behind. Grun would lead the way using his gun if necessary, plus they made a couple of Molotov cocktails using Coke cans and strips of their shirts and the chainsaw mixture. Corey won the coin flip, which meant he got to choose whether he or Growler went with Grun. He decided to go and let Growler stay with the family of 4 and the young woman. It was his chainsaw after all. He figured he had the better chance of making it. Growler walked them out to the stairs. He wished them well and hurried back to the safety of the bathroom, and before he was entering into it, he could hear the whining sound of the chainsaw having been started and then revved. On the stairs, when they neared the bottom, the 2 men got into position to walk to the 18-wheeler. Grun was leading the way with his revolver. Following behind him was Corey, faced backwards. They were tied to each other's belt loop so they couldn't get too far apart. As they stepped out onto the lower deck, Corey revved the chainsaw to let the creatures know they would get hurt if they tried to rush the 2 men. Neither Grun nor Corey could see any beasts of any kind, but that wasn't too comforting because they couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. Grun stumbled into Corey's pickup, or rather what was left of it after Grun had run his truck into it. If you paid close attention, you could see a slight reminder of Grun's race toward the lower deck in his truck. There was just the slightest hint that a big truck had come through the lower parking lot and into the lower deck beyond. Grun locked onto the slight difference and followed it with expectations of being taken almost right into the cab of the semi. Before he would let Grun take them further, Corey had him wait while he fished around on the back bumper seeking the fishing line he had used before. He didn't find it, but did find one of his fishing poles which had a reel on it. A few seconds later they were on their way again, this time carrying the fishing pole along with everything else. Every step Grun expected to come face to face with one of the creatures which had killed his brother. It was seeming to take forever to reach the semi. The truck was locked, but he was lucky that he and his brother traveled in tandem often enough that they kept a spare set of keys to each other's trucks on their own keychain. They only kept the key that allowed them to get into the cab or trailer, but since they had left the trucks running, then that was all that was needed. So they had that going for them, which was a lot. If they made it to the truck. Behind him, Grun could hear the chainsaw still being revved, and he could feel the jerk of the tied line whenever they started to get too far apart. This was a better idea than it looked on paper, Corey thought, as he continued to be guided where to walk backwards. True, they couldn't see what was in front or for that matter behind them, but within their personal space they were actually pretty safe. At least until Groon was forced to use up the ammunition that remained. The plan was that if he heard the gun going off, then it meant that they no longer had cover to the front, which would mean he would move forward while Groon was to move to the back, keeping the same formation, only this time Groon would be covering their backside using the hatchet while he forged ahead with the chainsaw. As bad as the snow was coming down, Corey thought they had a better than even chance of making it to the truck without being found. A short while later Groon came to a stop and Corey backed into him. "Why'd you stop?" Corey asked while continuing to peer into the infinite snowfall, searching for any sign there was a creature coming at them. "I'm wondering if we shot past the destination?" Groon replied. "I guess I will keep going a ways. I'll start counting my steps, so if we decide we went too far we will know how far to return. I am guessing that if we miss the truck it is just a little further to our right. What would really be helpful right now is if we could at least guarantee we could get back to this spot." "Why do you think I dragged the fishing pole along?" Corey replied. "Worked for me earlier, so I expect it will now. Our biggest problem is we don't have a lot to anchor to, but I'm thinking we can tie off to the hatchet and leave it here. It should be heavy enough that if we don't go jerking on the line that we ought to be able to follow it back to here." "Good thinking," Groon said. "That might well be the difference between us making it and not. Don't get the saw caught into the line." Corey wiped snow from his eyes and said, "Let's go about 25 steps, and if we haven't found it by then let's come back." I tried to line up the bathrooms with the overhead light in the parking lot that was closest to where the trucks were parked back when visibility was better. If we are walking true, then we should come upon the light soon. Then the trucks are probably the distance we have covered to reach the light, minus a little bit, straight in the direction we will have been going. It's basically a shot in the dark. Hopefully we find the truck before one of them finds us." Groon hollered over the wind. He handed the hatchet over to Corey so that the fishing line could be tied to it. When that was accomplished, they placed the hatchet deep into the snow in hopes it would be enough to keep the hatchet from sliding around if they had to use the line to return to that spot. Then they kept going in the same direction, Groon leading with Corey running the chainsaw following, walking backwards so that their backside was covered. Groon walked off 24 steps and they still had not found the truck. Just as he was about to take the last step before turning back, he saw one of the creatures. It had its back to them. Groon took aim and fired. Back at the bathrooms, the men's door had become once again a target for large rocks. Growler had the plank back in place, keeping the door secure. He was tired of peeking out the small window they had cut into the door. The attack against the men's door was enough to keep him from gaining a better view. It was just as well since visibility had not gotten any better, but Growler didn't know that because his view was so restricted. He wished he could have seen the lower deck from his window, but he was going to have to rely on them to make enough noise to notify when it was time to go. Then he remembered he had Corey's phone number and was surprised to see he did have service. Suddenly the banging on the bathroom door changed from the sound of the rocks being thrown at it to the sound of large fists beating against it. Growler grabbed the jug of chainsaw mix and poured some of it into a can of Coke that had the top torn off it. This made it much easier to throw the gas mixture. He stepped up to the door and threw the gas out the window, followed by a match he lit and then tossed through. There was a whoosh followed by the screams of whatever creature had chosen to test their resolve again. Growler didn't have a lot more of the mixture to spare if he wanted to have some to protect them when they moved to the truck. Assuming the guys made it. After firing at the big ape-like creature, Groon turned and almost knocked Corey to the ground. He caught him, and after getting him back on his feet. Then Groon whispered, "Go. Follow the string back to the starting spot. Then when we get there just keep going at a 90-degree angle. Stay quiet and hurry." Corey turned the saw off and they followed the fishing line until they arrived at the hatchet. Corey wasted no time getting at a 90-degree angle and moving ahead. Groon's anxiousness and the sound of the gunshot told him all he needed to know about how much time they had to spare before the creatures would be on top of them. Time seemed to stretch out, and when they saw the truck it took a few seconds for them to realize the reason they could see the truck so clearly. The snow had stopped and the wind was also gone. Both men began running for the truck without daring to look behind them. They were both very aware that an animal or human that was as tall as these things were would have a stride which could easily overtake that of a normal man's stride. Despite refusing to look behind them, they could see standing between them and the restrooms were more of the creatures. The ones closer to them began running at them in an attempt to cut them off. Corey began laughing as the men ran to the truck. All he could think about was if he didn't make it, that his money he was to get would end up being eaten away by lawyers hired by anybody close to him that had even an outside shot at getting their hands on it. He had been meaning to get a lawyer and adjust his will so to make it clear where the money was going, but lack of funds had kept him from doing it. Now as he raced for his life, he thought how little the extra few $100s were to get the updated will compared to what she was going to lose out on. Who would have thought this was how he was going to see things end? Then it began to be clear they had the angle and were going to make it to the truck before the big beasts reached them. The question was, would they have time to get into the truck before the beasts caught them? Never was Corey ever more anxious than when he reached the passenger side of the truck and was forced to wait while Groon caught up to his side, and then while he got the rig unlocked as the creatures raced to them. Groon hit the horn as soon as he had unlocked the passenger side door, which almost scared Corey back off the truck. Only his fear of the creatures racing at them kept him from falling back off the truck. Groon rolled down his window and waited until the first creature was close enough he couldn't miss and fired. He didn't wait to see if it killed the thing. Instead, Groon put the rig into gear and began rocking it forward through the deep snow. The creatures were now encircling the truck, but they seemed afraid to do more than just stand back from it about 20 feet. Groon kept the truck moving enough to keep the animals from getting too close. Rocks began to hit the cab of the truck, but the snowfall had done a good job of hiding them. Plentiful as they were in the mountains, that was not nearly so true when everything was covered in white. So the attack was loud and intimidating, but they didn't even have a window crack, as they rolled past the creatures down to where Corey's pickup sat in a crumpled state due to Groon's previous trip that direction. A tree limb struck the passenger side window, crashing through it. At the same time, things were coming to a head back at the restrooms. Between the restroom waiting area and the stairs leading down to the lower deck was a minefield of rocks ranging from softball size to basketball, some completely hidden by a coating of white and others partially covered. It would be a tough obstacle field by its own merit, but traversing the distance while dodging giant apes was just asking for a couple of broken ankles or legs. Lucky for them, it was not a long journey, but it would definitely be treacherous to those not sure-footed. "Be ready to go," Growler told the family of 4 and the young woman. He noticed the number of rocks banging against the door was dropping off. Always a good thing, he thought. Whether due to the fact that the beasts were having trouble finding more rocks to throw, or perhaps the sudden clearing of the weather. They had stopped throwing stuff at the bathroom door. Growler handed a Coke can with the top torn off and filled with enough gasoline mixture to do harm to all of the adults. They were instructed to stop by the fire on the way out, and grab a little torch that he had fashioned for each of them. To light it up in the fire, then follow the person in front of them, giving ample room so nobody was tripping over each other. Growler led the way. He opened the bathroom door and was happy to see nothing in his way but a lot of rocks. Another thing he was happy to see was that he had been correct when earlier he had thought he saw the weather changing, but he couldn't be positive due to having only that little window to peer out. Outside he saw the big 18-wheeler rocking in the snow, and then he heard a gunshot ring out and he could see Groon hanging out his driver's side window shooting at the closest big ape. Then he heard the truck grind itself into a different gear and the engine rev like an airplane engine sounds just before it is taking off. That sound of the giant diesel engine roaring to its full capacity was all the motivation Growler needed to spur his team forward. They raced down the stairs, this way then that, until they were pouring out onto the lower deck. At that same time, Groon was putting the pedal to the metal. A limb had just come through the passenger side window, throwing glass everywhere and barely missing a direct hit on Corey's head. Groon roared the engine to its full strength and let go the clutch, sending the machine powering forward through the snow, which was waist high in its tamest spots. The truck lurched into the snow, refusing to lose the tug-of-war going on between its wheels and the snow trying to hold it back. The snow was no match. The big rig pushed through the deep snow and went past the beasts, which had either arrived at its former location or were racing toward it as the truck went past them. Down at the lower deck, Growler was leading his band of merry men and women to the steps that led off the deck. The semi was coming their way with the horn blowing and a limb sticking out of the passenger side window. They all moved so to be on the passenger side of the truck, and when it came to a sliding stop, Corey wasted no time pushing the door open and helping everyone in. They all kept piling into the sleeper part of the big truck, some on top of others, finishing with Corey sticking out the sleeper and Growler pulling the door shut with the limb still sticking out of it. As the big truck went into gear and grinded itself down the snow-covered exit ramp, Growler pushed the limb out the window, sending more glass over himself and the inside of the truck. Nobody complained about the cold air rushing into the cab. Just as long as it was moving, everybody was happy. Some of the beasts caught up to the truck but could only run alongside for a distance before giving up. Out onto the interstate the big truck roared. The first big climb was just beyond the place where they came back onto the highway. It was a tense moment because the truck didn't have the snow chains on it and they feared they were still too close to the beasts to risk stopping to put them on. Grun raced the engine and began the climb. If the truck wouldn't make the summit, then they would deal with that when it happened. Upward the big truck pushed slowly but steadily. They probably didn't ever get past 5 miles an hour, but that was okay. They never fell below 1 mile an hour, and that was their big worry. Along about 1:30 that afternoon was when they reached the summit, and that was the first place and time they stopped the truck since making their escape. Everyone needed to stretch. Grun used the time to put on the snow chains. By the time they were ready to move on down the highway, there was an orange flashing light attached to a large truck with a large snow shovel on its front, coming at them from the other side of the highway. 20 minutes after that they were passed by a snow shovel which came from the same direction as them. Grun had just enough time to move out of the way before another shovel came along behind the first one. They fell in behind the 2 shovels and followed them into the next available sign of civilization. After getting free from the rest area and finding they did in fact have service, calls were made to the authorities. They were met at the exit by the CHP and debriefing came after medical attention and food. The official report never mentioned sky creatures, nor did it mention the state the bodies were found, and in some cases, not found.